I'm Roberto Bosco, and I'm unusually young and passionate about cars. At 16, I started secretly driving my dad's car, trying to find an excuse to drive it. I'd wash it for him 3 times a week, just to go for a drive around the block. In the 1970s, I had some racing experience with cars, but then life circumstances prevented me from pursuing my passion. We got close to the year 2000 in 1996 or 1997 to be precise, and I finally achieved a goal I'd set my sights on. I managed to buy an old Porsche from the 1960s, specifically a 1962 Porsche Super 90. This car was owned by a professional from Turin who competed in speed races, so to speak, in the classic car category. So it had nothing to do with modern competitions, but rather races with vintage cars. And in that case, it was the car I dreamed of owning in my youth. This car was already prepared with a series of special features, and so I began to use it as it was. The livery wasn't its original one. It was a white livery with red stripes, and with this I began, let's say, to experience the first real emotions, in the sense that I was responsible not only for the driving, but also the mechanic, the financier. So I was the one who had to pay for the expenses and, unfortunately, also for the repairs. Because when you compete in competitions, and these competitions are stimulating, they end up being a brawl, becoming moments when, perhaps due to distraction or excessive competitive ability, you end up in damages. So I began to experiment with rallying. It takes 2 people. You have to spend nights testing the routes. You have to have great mutual trust. The driver and the navigator in the driver. And so until a symbiosis between the two is established, the results aren't there, because the driver, when the co-driver indicates a type of curve, is always worried, will it be true or false? And the same goes for the co-driver. If I tell him to go faster, maybe this will lead me into an obstacle. And the second experience was the track. In this case, however, we race alone, minimizing the car's weight to the homologation limit, which required a complete overhaul of the car. The car was dismantled down to the last detail. The bodywork, then the chassis, was improved with all the reinforcements that Porsche already included at the time for cars intended for track competitions. So I restored it to its historic appearance with the period color, the period finishes, and I dedicated myself to speed on the circuit. There too I gained some experience and said, now I have to do something else. I quit, so to speak, in the sense that I stopped competing regularly in track races and started competing in hill climbs. This is also an individual event where there's no competition with others. It's a timed race. I gained some experience, I had a few setbacks. The bollard, the snow, the tree I missed, the garbage can being taken away from the corner of a house. I finished, let's say, this experience of hill climbs. At this point, I returned to the starting point, that is circuit races, but in this case, no longer the sprint races of 20, 30 minutes of racing, but rather endurance races. In Europe, we have, let's say, one of the most important circuits in the world for endurance racing, called the Nürburgring. I think everyone who loves cars knows this circuit, and there too, the first year it didn't go well. The second year we couldn't even get the start. The third year we made it. Together with the mechanic who had prepared the car's engine, we managed to, let's say, win, as you might say, our class, our category. And so I concluded the sporting experiences that can be had with this car. Now, after a few years, I've become intrigued by the possibilities the regulations offer. There are so-called regularity races, where you can also participate with vintage cars, even better if the cars have a history like my Porsche does. And so I started using it again, after having put it aside since, let's say, 2009, because I did my last real race in 2009. So starting in 2020, more or less, I've started doing, let's say, the things we used to do, but now more touristy, done with the possibility of even looking out the window and perhaps accompanied by, or no longer by a professional, but by a loved one who can share these experiences with you. Each of us has passions. What does passion mean? Passion is something that, if you don't experience it, you can hardly perceive what it can give you. In someone, I'm one of those. Even at a later age, I managed to be able to fully experience this emotion. And so this car was a dream for me since I was 18. It conveyed emotions that weren't just those of the image, of the beautiful object, of the design, which even now, after 60 years, is a very contemporary design. But it was the emotion I felt in hearing its engine, feeling how it turned. And so I imagined when I was a boy what I would feel using this car. Luck, as I said before, wanted this opportunity to come my way. The car was already a machine with some special preparations. It had been prepared by a wizard of these machines, who unfortunately is no longer with us, a certain Cataneo, who in the 80s and 90s was the pinnacle of mechanics and development for his ability to bring these objects back to full youth. And so the first thing I did was take it to the magician to restore the car's splendor, its sound, its acceleration, braking, and road holding as it once had. And this mechanic brought it back to me fresh, 20 years old, full of energy, with tons of horsepower, because it was originally designed with 90 horsepower. It's actually called the Super 90 model. But in reality, this car came with a track engine producing more than 120 horsepower. So that's an extra amount of energy that needs to be harnessed by the chassis, which has to withstand the speed, the braking, and the twisting that occurs when cornering. And so it was completely dismantled. All the mechanical parts were overhauled. The chassis was reinforced in all the parts that needed to be reinforced, according to Porsche's specifications of the time. And then the car was completely restored to its original state. Or perhaps even more, because today's tires perform better, the oils and the materials used to build vintage cars are of better quality than the parts of the period, and so they actually perform better today than they did back then. Car enthusiasts, in my opinion, can be categorized into three families: the contemplatives, the users, and the junkyards. In reality, the contemplatives are content to own a beautiful object, to show it off to friends. They rarely take it to the bar because they're afraid of scratching it. But essentially, they don't enjoy beauty other than aesthetics. Then there are those in between who sometimes use them. But even if the car doesn't perform as it once did, they're not, let's say, interested in restoring it to that level. And above all, they're not used to driving wild cars like these vehicles. These vehicles have drum brakes, gearboxes without synchronizers, and therefore they are objects, so to speak, that must be mastered. Since I belong to the latter category, that is, the junkyards, I want to be able to enjoy them every now and then. Hear the engine roar, take a few turns or a few counter steers, because that's how I enjoy the car.